Good morning. And on behalf of the Piedmont Anti-Racism and Diversity Committee, otherwise known as PADC, and the City of Piedmont, we welcome you to Piedmont's 25th annual MLK celebration. I'd like to start us today with a quote from Dr. King. "Tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. This is not time for apathy or complacency. This is time for vigorous and positive action." My name is Jennifer Long, and I'm a co-president of PADC. Before we get introductions and get started with our program, we'd like to tell you a little bit about our organization. PADC is a 501c3 community benefit organization that has provided leadership since 2002 in Piedmont and surrounding California Bay Area communities in citywide policies, education programs, and public events that work to dismantle racism in institutions and to build inclusive and equitable communities. To learn more, please go visit our website at padc.info. Today's celebration is a milestone for PADC and for event founder Lois Corrin, who will be our MC today along with her daughter, Camille Lafayette. Lois started this MLK event to obviously celebrate MLK, but also to bring the Piedmont community together, to bring awareness and attention to the work and power we each have to ensure that Piedmont is a more inclusive community. Lois hails from New Jersey and raised her daughter here in Piedmont. Lois is a longtime member of the board of PADC and currently serves on the board of the League of Women Voters of Piedmont. Camille is a Piedmont High graduate, class of 2007, and was the keynote for the high school's 2021 graduation. We welcome them both. Before we begin today's program, we are going to recognize that here in Piedmont, we are occupying the ancestral lands of the Ohlone people. To help us pay respect, we are honored to welcome back Grammy-nominated artist and musician, Vince Redhouse.
In many religious traditions, it is customary to bring into the worship the call into the four directions. In the Native American way, this act symbolically invites all of creation to be present. From the east, which speaks of the rising sun, the sunrise. The south, which relates to the experience of the day. The west, it speaks of the setting sun and the beauty of what we have worked to be. The north is a time where we are tried and when we see that we need help that is greater than our own. This morning, we too want to invite the whole of creation to be with us. O great Spirit of the East, we turn to you where the sun comes up, from where the power of new beginnings and enlightenment come. Everything that is born comes from this direction, the beginning of life, the birth of ideas and the birth of friendships. Let there be light. O Spirit of the East, let the color of your rising in our life bring glory to you. O great Spirit of the South, Spirit of all that is warm and gentle, We ask that you give us the spirit of growth and fertility and bounty. Give us seeds that the flowers, trees, and fruits of the earth may grow. Give us the warmth of love in our friendships. Caress us with the cool breeze when the days are hot. O Spirit of the South, send us the amazing growth of your blessings. O great Spirit of the West, where the sun goes down each day to come up the next, we turn to you in praise of sunsets and in thanksgiving for changes. You are the great sunset of the red West, which illuminates us. You are the powerful cycle which pulls us to transformation. We ask for the blessings of the sunset and to keep us open to life's changes. O great Spirit of the North, we come to you and ask for the strength and power to bear what is cold and harsh in life. Whatever is cold and uncertain in life, we ask you to give us strength to bear it. We look up during these times as we know our help comes from on high. O Spirit of the North, we ask for your strength. And Lord, we are so grateful that we can be in your presence this day. Amen. I wanted to just share something on the native flute, and I'm really honored to be here today to lift up and to really express our thanks and gratitude for Martin Luther King, the great man that he was, and his ideas which challenge us and will challenge us to this day. Myself as a musician, as a Native American, I've been challenged to walk in a number of different worlds. And today I'm really glad that I can share some music on this instrument, the native flute. And this is going to be music I think that everybody will be able to appreciate. Because it's jazz.
Thank you, Vince. Thank you so much. From Amazing Grace to jazz. I so appreciate you describing all the wind, the directions, including our ancestors, and giving us hope that when the sun rises, we will have a good day. Well, I am really excited to be here. This is 25 years of celebrating Dr. Martin Luther King, and it's extra special because this time I get to co-host with my daughter. She's brilliant. She's a UCLA Bruin and a graduate of Wagner School of Public Service at NYU. When she was in high school, she was the MC for the last time when she was in high school. This celebration feels so good to me, and I had no idea it would last this long, and we would sustain it. And probably more important, that we really need to do the work that we're doing. As some of you recall, this event is personal to me. My father and Dr. King were at Morehouse together on the debate team. And when I was 7 years old, I met Dr. King on Hampton University's campus with my mother, when my grandfather had been dean of Ben. I had hoped we'd be able to return to our event, but next year it's going to be all good. We'll have potlucks and dancing and all those things. So what's going on in the program? Camille, can you give us a sneak peek?
Good morning, everyone. As my mother said, the celebration of MLK in Piedmont has been around for most of my life. When I was a senior, as she mentioned, in Piedmont High School, I actually emceed this event, so very full circle for me. One of my most prominent memories from attending as a kid was creating quilt squares with my friends about what Dr. King's teachings really meant to us, to create a giant community square and quilt that we could share with everyone. We are extremely fortunate to have two scholars to help us honor Dr. King today. First, writer Anna Malika Tubbs will talk about her recent book that fills a historical gap about the mothers of the country's greatest civil rights icon. Then we'll get to visit again with Dr. Claiborne Carson from Stanford. Dr. Carson will talk about World House, his recent initiative to extend Dr. King's vision for a peaceful and more inclusive world. But before we dive in, I'd like to welcome Piedmont Mayor Teddy King. Mayor King, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. Camille, you truly are the apple of your mom's eye. I adore your mom, and first thing we always talk about is how Camille's doing. So it's nice to meet you virtually, at least. I just want to say good morning to everyone in attendance. I miss the in-person gathering of this beautiful event. To be sure, the annual Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. celebration is always one of the most impactful ceremonies that we have in the city of Piedmont. And of course, I want to say a big thank you to all the people who are bringing us together right now. Most importantly, Piedmont Anti-Racism and Diversity Committee that works year in and year out, along with my cherished friend, Lois Corin, and my school board colleague, Veronica Thigpen. They are making this day spectacular. As we stand here today reflecting on Dr. King's legacy and absorbing the civil rights landscape of America in 2022, I have to ask myself, would Dr. King think we've lost our way? Would Dr. King look at the inequity and the injustice and the lack of housing, the unequal education that confronts us and weep and scold us for not doing enough and for being too comfortable in our routines and our social media bubbles? And we'll never know, but we can guess. But today is not about recriminations or what has not been done. Today must be a celebration of what can be done. How can we change our hearts and impact our community and support the millions of Americans who stand up day after day demanding justice and equity for Black people, for brown people, immigrants, Native Americans, the poor, the sick, and the helpless, particularly in this time of COVID? Dr. King's legacy calls for us to fix the legacy of segregation and Jim Crow. Dr. King's legacy calls for us to call out injustice and replace hatred with love and respect and understanding. And Dr. King's legacy demands that we do everything we can to support the sanctity of voting rights. It should not be easy to vote in a white community like Piedmont, but difficult in Black and brown communities. As anyone knows who reads the news, voting rights are uneven in our country and becoming more so. The 2020 election proved that voting rights are under attack in many places. What are we doing today to make sure that the voting rights that Dr. King literally was jailed for are protected? So these are important things we have to ponder, and it's starting out this beautiful ceremony with a little snapshot of where we stand in 2020 America. So as the mayor of Piedmont, I am thrilled to introduce our following speakers who have statewide and national platforms to address this issue in California and across the United States. I'm proud to call Assemblymember Buffy Wicks a friend. She represents Piedmont in the State Assembly with a passionate voice. Assemblymember Wicks served President Obama in the White House, helped pass health care for all Americans, and is doing an outstanding job of creating housing throughout the state of California. Also, I'm honored that Congresswoman Barbara Lee, who represents Piedmont, will be providing a recorded message. Congresswoman Lee puts herself on the front lines of progressive legislation every single day, and more than anyone I know personally, lives to fulfill Dr. King's legacy through her work. In conclusion, I myself am the granddaughter of Mexican immigrants. I have not known the sting of racism personally, but my mom did, my grandparents did, and that sting is a burden that people carry their whole lives. And knowing that, I feel an obligation to call out racism and unfairness every time I see it. So, with a joyful heart, let's proceed with a hopeful voice this morning. And then, after we celebrate Dr. King's legacy, let's commit ourselves to redoubling our efforts to make Dr. King's dream a reality. And with that, I want to say thank you for this beautiful day.
Thank you so much to Mayor King for your kind introduction, and thank you to the Piedmont Anti-Racism and Diversity Committee for organizing the 25th Annual Piedmont MLK Celebration. Today, we honor the life of one of our nation's brightest beacons for justice, a giant of the civil rights movement, and a trailblazer in the pursuit of equality, dignity, and humanity for all. Let us recognize this day by recommitting ourselves to the theme of this event, changing souls, changing lives, and creating community. This is an uncertain time in our nation's history. Racism and hate are rising with increased intensity. Economic inequality is widening to unprecedented levels, and democratic rights are being threatened across the country and the world. And yet, this is not a time for hopelessness. This anniversary always reminds us that we must hold fast to that unyielding hope exemplified by Dr. King. As he said, change does not roll in on the wheels of inevitability, but comes through continuous struggle. Those words apply now just as much as they did during Dr. King's day. To finally realize the change that Dr. King envisioned and to create community we want to leave to our children and grandchildren, we must continue the struggle for full participation and equality in our democracy, for truth-telling in our politics, and for the rights and dignity of the most vulnerable among us. As always, We are in this struggle together. I look forward to working with all of you this year to continue the march towards justice and equality and anti-racism. And I hope to see all of you again in person at next year's event. Please stay safe and stay healthy.
Hi everyone, Buffy Wicks here. I represent beautiful Assembly District 15, which includes Piedmont. I'm so excited to be with you today electronically, virtually. I'm bummed that I can't be with you all in person since we're not doing an in-person event. And I was thinking back to the last time I was with you all in person 2 years ago. And think about what has happened to this country in the last 2 years, what has happened to this world in the last 2 years. You know, obviously we're healing from the former presidency of Donald Trump and the pain that he has caused this nation, and unearthing all of the trauma for particularly communities of color with what he did with our country. Thinking about the fact that we're still crawling out of a global pandemic that none of us anticipated, and the realities of what that meant for our communities of color, and the fact that we see racial inequities within our healthcare system and the economic fallout that is caused for so many of our communities. If you look at what's happened during the pandemic, women of color in particular were hit hardest during that pandemic. Looking at what's happened in the last 2 years, the death of George Floyd and the racial reckoning that this country is undergoing right now because of that death and so many others that were absolutely unjustified. And it is my hope as we look to the future that we really fundamentally address these issues, that we shine a bright spotlight on what has hurt this nation for far too long. And I think of Martin Luther King when I think about what is our path forward. And one of my favorite quotes is, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." And I know sometimes it doesn't feel like it's bending. And I have felt that too over the last couple of years. But I also know that it is incumbent upon all of us to make sure that we are bending that arc. And we do that in big ways and we do that in small ways, but we do that together. We do that in family conversations at the dining room table. We do that when we engage with folks at the grocery store, our parents, teachers, our community. We do that by making community and talking about these issues and trying to heal together. So on this Martin Luther King Day commemoration celebration, think of what motivates you and how you can be a part of the change, because that's fundamentally what his teachings were about, how we can all be part of the change to make our communities more just, more equitable, and to have a stronger sense of love for everyone in our community. So with that, thank you very much. Honored to be here. And I just appreciate representing you all and all the work that you do every single day for our communities.
You're broken down and tired of living life in a merry-go-round. You can't find a fighter, but I see you, we're gonna walk it out. And ooh, mountains, we gonna walk it out. And ooh, mountains, and I'll rise up, I'll rise like the day, I'll rise up, I'll rise unafraid, I'll rise up, and I'll do it 1,000 times again. I'll rise up, high like the waves, I'll rise up, in spite of the ache, I'll rise up, and I'll do it 1,000 times again. Silence isn't quiet, and it feels like it's getting hard to breathe. I know you feel like dying, but I promise we'll take the world to its feet. Ooh, mountains, take the world to its feet. Ooh, mountains, I will rise up. Rise like the day, I'll rise up, in spite of the ache, I'll rise up, and I'll do it 1,000 times again. each other. And for that we have each other. We will rise, we will rise, we will rise up, rise like the day. I'll rise up, I'll rise unafraid. I'll rise up, and I'll do it 1,000. Rise up, I like the waves. I'll rise up, in spite of the elements. I'll rise up, and I'll do it 1,000. For you, for you,
Rise Up, what a beautiful song, and all those beautiful voices and faces. I'm just so proud. I'm just so proud of this group and so happy that they have continued to be with us.
Grateful for Barbara Lee for sharing her message, uplifting hope, continuing in Dr. King's teaching. Next, we are delighted to introduce today's keynote speaker, Anna Malika Tubbs. She is the author of the book, The Three Mothers: How the Mothers of Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and James Baldwin Shaped a Nation. In a pre-recorded interview with PADC's Richard Turner, Ms. Tubbs shares what she learned about the life of Alberta King and her influence on Dr. King's philosophy. And
Anna, I would first like to welcome you to our event and thank you for sharing your time with us today. And I would like to acknowledge the diligence and tremendous amount of research that you obviously put into crafting this groundbreaking book.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for having me. It's really an honor.
Oh, it's our honor. I would like to have you read a passage from the book, if you wouldn't mind, to start, and then we'll get into the interview.
I'd love to. Okay.
Do you want to set this up?
Definitely. So this is on page 142. It's in one of the chapters that I am kind of delving a little bit more into the sons' lives. And most of the book really is about the mothers, but a big part of it is for us to get to know the sons better through knowing their mothers as well. So this is just a paragraph about Martin. At the age of 19, Martin graduated from college, ready to combine his desire to end racial injustice with his calling to join his family's vocation in ministry. The same year Jimmy moved to Paris, Martin enrolled in Crozier Theological Seminary, where he would go on to receive his degree in divinity in 1951. He was on an intellectual quest for a method to eliminate social evil. He described his approach to ministry by saying, "Any religion that professes concern for the souls of men and is not equally concerned about the slums that damn them, the economic conditions that strangle them, and the social conditions that cripple them, is a spiritually moribund religion only waiting for the day to be buried." Martin beautifully put words to the approaches his family had been taking to ministry, education, and social justice for generations.
Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
So I'm going to start in by describing a synopsis of your book and then lead into a question. In your book, The Three Mothers, you introduce us to three strong women, Alberta King, Louise Little, and Bertus Baldwin.
Yeah.
All three women are strong social activists and mothers who impart their penchant for social change on all of their children, including Martin, Malcolm, and James.
Mm-hmm.
In light of our celebration today, can you share with us the way in which Alberta and her family before her laid the foundation for the work Martin Luther King Jr. would later go on to champion.
Absolutely. And I think it's such an important thing for more of us to be aware of, that Martin did not pop out of nowhere fully formed with these ideas around social justice and nonviolence, but instead that he was rooted not only because of his own parents, but because of generations before them of freedom fighters who were really honing in on the best ways to fight injustice, to fight racism, to fight Jim Crow. And so he is raised by a woman who was born to the leaders of Ebenezer Baptist Church. So in history, we've kind of made a mistake in the way we retell this story. We often say that MLK Jr. inherited the church from his father, MLK Sr., but the reality is actually that Alberta's parents, so MLK's maternal grandparents, are the ones who established Ebenezer Baptist Church. So his mother is raised by these two leaders who believe that faith should always be intertwined with social justice, that if you are a Christian leader, you also stand against oppression, you stand against poverty, you stand up for the oppressed. And if you have privileges like an education, so her family, they're all well educated. The men in her family all go to Morehouse. The women in her family go to Spelman. This is a respected tradition in their family. If you have this privilege of education, you don't just hold that for yourself. Instead, you use it as a tool to advance a cause forward for your entire community. So this is what Alberta believes. She grows up attending marches and participating and helping to organize boycotts. Her parents are some of the very first members of the NAACP. She is also one of the earliest members of the NAACP, as well as the YWCA, and so many other organizations where she is really practicing these methods. And she does this long before she's married and long before her children are even a thought in her mind. And it's because this has been passed down to her from generations before her. So by the time MLK Jr. is born, this is something that his family has been practicing for a very long time, and they pass it on to him. Of course, he adds to it with his own experience. Of course, I'm not taking that away in terms of him seeking his own education and bringing in some of the vocabulary that's being shared around the world. We know that Gandhi is one of his inspirations. We know that he's going to start using the term nonviolence, but it's not because it's brand new to him, but instead because he's learned about this as a child. And now he says, oh, wow, these are the terms that I can use to describe what my family has been practicing for generations.
And so actually, that's perfect, because one of the things that I think you underline throughout the book is something that passage you read brings to fore, that he didn't come into existence out of the blue. It's the history of his not only his mother, but the generations before her were responsible for creating the milieu in which he moved. And in that light, given that his mother was a very strong influence, he often went to her for counseling. What does your research tell us about the role that Alberta played in counseling Martin as he struggled with issues of poverty and war, and ultimately made the decision to publicly state his opposition to the Vietnam War?
Yeah, it's critical in his entire journey. So he is really close to his mom. He feels very understood by his mother. I mean, I think many of us can relate to that nobody understands you in the way that your mother does. And so he often goes to her even from the moment he's a young boy and is encountering racism for the first time. You know, he talks about this story of being friends with the children who are whose parents own the local store, and how he's friends with them up until a point where it's no longer okay for them to mingle because they are white and he is black. So it's okay when they're little, but when they get to a certain age, it's no longer allowed for them to be friends. And so this is a moment from an early age that MLK Jr. starts to see kind of the weirdness and the lack of rationale behind racism. And so he goes to Alberta. He's sitting with her. He's obviously expressing his confusion, his sadness. And she holds him and she says, "You're as good as anybody." But she also explains the history that has led to this moment, that has led to Jim Crow. She explains what's happened in the Civil War. She explains slavery. She explains where we are, where they were in that moment in time. And then she says, and here are some strategies that you can use to fight this. Here are ways in which racism also interacts with classism. We have to remember, again, she's very well educated. She has a bachelor's degree. This is not something we can take for granted. In the 1920s, when MLK Jr. is born, that his mother has a bachelor's degree as a Black woman. So we also know how much her family emphasized her education. And so there's this constant communication between thinking about racism not as some separate issue that we can kind of attack on its own, but instead an understanding the many layers that are going to contribute to the perpetuation of racism in the United States. So we also have to think about how our socioeconomic status is affecting our relationship to the fight. We have to think about what other factors will need to change in order for us to eradicate racism on the whole.
And it's interesting, the depth of their relationship, Martin and Alberta's, and sort of playing out to some of your own experience and my own experiences. As parents, it's often sometimes very difficult for us to accept and address constructively the foibles of our children. What does your research tell us about what we can learn from ways that Alberta and these other mothers dealt with those issues with their children?
Yeah, I mean, we see so many different strategies for parenting in the book as well. So not only is it about, how they're teaching their children to fight racism and to think about changing the world, we also see them interacting with their kids when their children are showing that they're still becoming who they are. So a big part of the book is for us to remember the humanity of not only these three mothers and acknowledging that they existed, but also in these three men, that they weren't deities. They were human beings with loved ones, and they were human beings with flaws. They were human beings who had a trajectory, and they weren't just where they weren't stagnant in their beliefs. And a lot of that, in terms of navigating what they believed and how they were going to show up in this world and what they were going to say to the public as they became more famous, really was influenced by the conversations they had with both their parents, but especially with their mothers.
And so in your journey, in terms of unearthing the stories of these three mothers, what struggles did you encounter in terms of your responsibility as a storyteller and as a historian?
Several. On one hand, it's really important for me to tell people that this is all original research. Before this book, this wasn't available to us. So it's not like I just went and took things that were out there and brought them together. It was instead, I had to uncover the truth behind the little teeny bits of information that were out there about each of these mothers. And so that was a challenge in and of itself. I was really inspired by Hidden Figures, Margot Lee Shetterly's book, really inspired by The Warmth of Other Suns, Isabel Wilkerson's masterpiece. But the thing that was different between me and the work that they were doing was I couldn't interview the women who I was studying. So I had to go and really dig as deep as I could to find what I found for this book. So that was one of the major struggles, of course, but that's what also was so exciting, was that I was going to be associated with uncovering the truths around these women and really making sure we gave them the honor and the respect and the recognition that they deserve. And I hope I'm not the only one. I hope this is just the first of many projects around these three women, but it was incredibly difficult to be one of the first and to just find what I was able to find. And the other struggles, of course, each of these families, they are inundated with requests. They have often felt hurt by the ways in which scholars and journalists have kind of dissected their loved ones and analyzed them again as if they weren't human beings who still have loved ones who are alive. This is very recent history. It's very painful history. We have to remember that all three of these men were, their mothers lost them before their own time. So I wanted to approach that with as much respect as I possibly could, to honor the fact that family members would feel differently about my approach to this project, that maybe one sibling would want to be interviewed and another would not want to be. And I didn't want to cause any tension or any additional drama or any additional pain simply because I wanted to write this book. So that was also a challenge, but one that, because I acknowledged from an early kind of phase in the research, I think I was able to navigate with a lot of respect, and the families appreciated that and are now very proud that the book is out. And I am proud to have made them happy with this work, and that they can see that all I ever wanted was to honor these three women in the way that they deserve to be honored. But those are some of those struggles. So especially when you're studying people who I believe have very intentionally been erased because they don't fit our kind of societal notion of who the heroes of our stories are, a very patriarchal notion, a very kind of white homogenous notion. When Black women are the ones who really have held this country on their shoulders, it is very intentional if we don't know their names, very intentional if we don't know their stories. And especially in these three cases where the connections between what these women did and what they studied and what they were passionate about is so clearly connected to what their sons became famous for, it is a crime that it took this long for us to know that.
In terms of getting to those issues that you raise about reaching out to the families and getting these histories, it's interesting to me that when you do, and you became a storyteller and a historian,
Yeah.
and that seems to me a very difficult bridge to cross. Because on the one hand, you have to gather information and sift through the agendas and the biases of the storytellers to get to the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the other hand, as the storyteller, you're developing your own arc and you have to be sensitive to your own tendencies and the story that you want to tell versus the story that you have to tell. How did you navigate that challenge?
Well, I appreciate that. It is really hard, especially because I was working on this as my doctoral dissertation at the same time as writing the book. So I was really blessed in the fact that I had a book deal while I was still a PhD student. I was originally thinking I was going to finish the PhD, then sell the book. But this was work that people wanted, which I was very excited about. And so I said, you know what, I can do both at the same time, sure. But what the challenge in that was that I was writing a very academic piece of work that is all theoretical, that is all very, keep the emotion out, keep the narrative out. But I am a storyteller. I write fiction as well as nonfiction. And so I knew for the book, I wanted it to be for larger audiences. I didn't want it to be within an academic press. I wanted to make sure that it was accessible and enjoyable to read. And when I say enjoyable, I don't mean you're going to be smiling the whole time. It's a really hard story. We know that there's ups and downs in these human narratives because it's complex, but enjoyable in the sense that it wasn't, academic jargon. And in my opinion, sometimes a little bit boring and difficult to get through. So that was my challenge, was making sure I had this distinction between the two where I could still earn my PhD and also be able to make sure people could access these stories, because I think they're so crucial to us, far beyond the academy, far beyond the ivory tower. So the way I navigated that was just making sure that I kind of put on different hats as I was writing both documents and thinking about what the audience would want to walk away with. On one hand, my doctoral committee wants to walk away with knowing that I did original research and these were the methods, and this is how I accomplished it, and this is how it adds to our canon of sociology. And on the other, people want to walk away knowing what it is that Alberta, Bertus, and Louise are still teaching us about our world today. And how can I, in reading these pages, feel connected to them as human beings, with emotion and with the love and the pain that they experienced. So it was a challenge, but also a very cool one, because I think if I wasn't doing the dissertation at the same time, people could have thought that I just went and found stories that were already out there and then was just a talented storyteller and brought the three together. But what this is, and I really appreciate you acknowledging that, is it was original research that I think I did a really good job putting in a story.
Yeah, no, I just didn't want to. I think that you did a really good job at navigating those two roads, those crossroads, and did tell a good story. And it's often difficult to do. There's the creative nonfiction where you have, this is a story I want to tell. But I really do think, and you didn't shy away from putting forward your social activism yourself. You have, and I think that dovetailed very much with Martin Luther King's social gospel in
Yeah.
terms of what he was trying to say in terms of criminal justice, poverty, and anti-racism. So I really want to thank you for spending this time with us. I want to thank you for writing the book and giving us this material. A lot of it, which was really groundbreaking for me to understand, and things that I was alive during some of these occurrences, and as you said, it's been submerged and we don't know. Are there any words you'd like to leave us with before we part?
My biggest thing is that this King Day, we celebrate not only MLK Jr. as we rightfully should, but that we also think, as we're celebrating his birthday, we think about the woman who birthed him. It's a really simple concept, but a very important one that can go a long, long way. And us understanding, again, he was a human being. He was a son. He was a husband. He was a father. All of that really allows us to honor him in the full capacity that we should. It's much more accurate. It's much more representative of his experience. And I think that's what he would have wanted, that we know where he came from, who his mother was, the city that raised him. All of that is crucial. He didn't exist on his own as some disconnected entity, but he was a human being who was rooted in his family and in his city.
Well, thank you for all that.
Thank you.
Okay, have a good evening.
You too.
What makes a good community? A good community does not mean stronger machines, advanced rockets. It does not mean we have more money in our pockets. A good community is about being helpful to individuals, about making it a safe area for the people around us. Community is no place for hate, and it is absolutely not a place to discriminate. The definition of a community is a town of people. They feel secure and they can feel shielded from enemies around us. A community means thinking about everyone else and making it a point to make sure you are there for one another. No people are left behind. No one goes ahead. We all have to finish the race together.
My poem is called Beloved Community. My name is Jonah Alonzo, and I'm in 3rd grade at Wildwood. This is my poem. Build a kind home. Everyone is nice. Listen to each other. Opinions matter. Voice your thoughts. Each person counts. Don't fight. Care for each other. Open your mind. Manners matter. Make a peaceful place. Use your words, nice to each other, include everyone. Together we are one, you can help others.
Piedmont, the tight-knit community, supposedly we are family, supposedly I know you, you know me, supposedly we care about, respect each other, but then supposedly is just a word. A lot of things are supposedly supposed to be, but they're not, because underneath the supposedly are families of adults and teens and kids hurt by us, the community. Could have been now, long ago, or somewhere in between, but the facts are there and need facing, that Piedmont is not the dream. Hurt grows when left alone, seeping slowly from the heart. It makes itself at home, and as it grows, we divide Piedmont's tight-knit quilt, now a mess of squares, all pulling away from the we to the me. To create that beloved community, we must heal what we cannot always see, address the pain of yesterday to approach a new tomorrow, where Piedmont can embrace the discomfort of its history and recognize the truth that brings the sorrow. And then it won't all just go away, because healing does take time. But with dawn comes a new day where we can stand tall and proud, smile at each other and say, look how far we have come, look at the journey we have begun, to healing and love and peace, to diversity and justice and inclusivity for our beloved community.
Community, a group of people who have come together. Caring and inclusive still, together we are tethered. We have gone through a pandemic hand in hand, here we stand unbroken. We have many challenges yet to face, but will remain unbroken. We will forever remember these days as we can say, we were hurled through every challenge and made it through. And we will never forget people's kindness as the virus took its due. Together as a community, we have made it through thick and thin, forever a reminder that together we can win.
I love seeing all of the brilliant art and thoughtful poems, essays from our children, don't you? They truly are the next generation of visionaries and leaders. And for the first time this year, the Piedmont Anti-Racism and Diversity Committee sponsored an art and essay showcase, and we received an incredible response: 10 poems, 6 essays, and 47 pieces of art. Each of them shared their vision for beloved community in Piedmont. So we actually held a raffle for each of the students who submitted their work. The following young people will receive a $25 gift card. Please welcome all of these lovely students who will be receiving the gift card with a round of applause. Ella Shafari, Alina Stevens, Hannah Joger, Lily Gervitz, Devin Porter, Dylan Jerez, Rita Lemley, Charlize Saigon, Evelyn Schaefer, Colette Keys. We will contact the winners and their families to make arrangements to ensure we can deliver their prizes.
And before I introduce our next guest, I wanted to thank the Mayor of Piedmont, Teddy King, and the Piedmont City Council for supporting this event for 25 years. In addition, I so appreciate the fact that there is a space here for youth to speak their truth and have it amplified. So our next guest is Dr. Claiborne Carson, who's been a friend of mine for years. He's the founding director of the Martin Luther King Jr. Research and Education Institute at Stanford, my alma mater, in case you didn't know. And he's joining us today with an interview with UC Berkeley journalism professor, David Thigpen, to talk about his latest endeavor, the World House Project. Welcome.
Good to talk to you.
Professor Carson, great to see you again.
Good to see you. I'm actually taking a break from another webinar, as you know, and that's been going on for 3 days, and it's wonderful to expand it, and maybe at some point we can bring our webinars together so that everybody can meet everybody. So
that sounds lovely. So I do want to ask you some questions about that today. But first, I've got a couple of other questions for you. So we were together last year, and one of the questions we discussed was the meaning of Martin Luther King's question, where do we go from here? And I wanted to ask you this. It's it's a really important question. It's also a daunting question because there are many, many different routes we can take. So I want to ask you this. How do we choose the direction that we go in? And are there signs along the way so we know that we're headed in the right direction as a community?
I think that was one of the beauties of Martin Luther King's oratory and his writings, is that he used a lot of metaphors. And one thing about metaphors is that you're trying to explain something that people might think is kind of hard to understand or complex, like the question you raised, where do we go from here? But one of the things is use the metaphor to say, there's already something that you know. It's already in your head. You know it. What I'm trying to tell you is very much like what you already know. And that is such a useful tool to get people to understand that his skill as a leader was untapping. We already know the answer to that question. We already know that we need to move, as he put it, toward a global community. And he said, well, the alternatives are chaos or community. And I think all of us know in our heart that the world is not going to be very successful unless we build that kind of global community. So we already know the answer to that question. We already know the direction we should be going. The question is, why don't we answer our own knowledge? Why we don't? Because it takes courage to face up to the fact, oh, if I don't follow my heart, the world is maybe not going to exist. And we can find lots of rational reasons for the choices that we make. But I think we can always rationalize the choice we make. So we can say, we might know how to behave better, how to make ourselves better. But for some reason, why do we choose something else? And that's where rationalization comes in. You can always rationalize it. Well, it's nice to think of the world of love. Yeah. That's not very practical. So I'm going to talk myself out of that. That is too difficult. And often the right choice is difficult. I mean, right now we face, look, what's happening this weekend. I talked to Clarence Jones just yesterday. He was Martin Luther King's attorney. He's 91 years old. And I posed that question to him, where do we go from here? And he said, Clay, when we were at that stage in the 1960s, we had a March on Washington. We need to occupy Washington. That we're at a crisis moment. Why isn't there a March on Washington now? And I think people often get chronology. Historians were always concerned about what happens first and what happens as the result. And so people know that civil rights legislation got passed. They also know that there was a March on Washington. They don't put those two facts together. The march came first, the legislation came second. And I think that's often happens in terms of how we understand Martin Luther King. At the end of his life, what was he trying to do? He was arguing we need to occupy Washington. People don't describe it as, they call it a poor people's campaign. There's maybe he should have just said, we need to have a second March on Washington. To change the economic opportunities of Americans. And that was a very radical thing to say, and he got a lot of flack for it, and maybe it cost him his life, because there were a lot of forces saying, you are not going to come and occupy Washington. with this Poor People's Campaign. Some of us are familiar that just in the last decade or so, there were some Occupy movements, and how, I remember one in Oakland where they went to City Hall and camped out in front of City Hall, and know how controversial that was.
Yeah.
So what Martin Luther King was saying is that you have to do, I guess what I would call radical things. So for the legal advisor of Martin Luther King to be telling us, we need to think about that. We need to think about where we are. Pending voting rights legislation. A lot of social legislation pending, kind of like the Poor People's Campaign. Things that would make life easier for families with children, for people going to school. All these kinds of things are pending as we speak, and they're not going to get passed.
Yeah.
And we seem to be resigned to that. And we have people saying, well, all that would be nice, but, oh, it's going to cost money. And, where were these people when we gave $1 trillion tax cut to the rich? Where were these people when we gave trillions of dollars to fight a war in Afghanistan? Why at that point do they say, oh, that's really impractical. We can't afford that. And yet these voices come through. You have people saying, oh, Kristen Sinema. I'll use her name in vain, because, here's a woman a senator who took pride in the fact that she was photographed with John Lewis, who was willing to give his life for the right to vote. And she's saying, John, I really like you, but I value the filibuster more than voting rights. Just think of the absurdity of that. And that's going on Martin Luther King's birthday. What would Martin say? It's easy to imagine what he would say about where we are right now.
Sure. No, so I don't want to be too prescriptive about it, but so for a small community like Piedmont, what can a Piedmonter do?
Other than go to Washington and protest? Well, I think what we can do wherever we are. When the March on Washington happened, there were protests throughout the United States. The March on Washington was the culmination of a series of protests throughout the nation, including the Bay Area, about racial discrimination and other things. So it was the culmination of all that. And that was really how I got involved in the movement. I would have wanted to go to quit school and go to the South and be a field secretary in Mississippi, but I was at UCLA, and instead I decided to join the Nonviolent Action Committee in Los Angeles. And they had that kind of militancy that I saw in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. They were willing to put their bodies on the line. They were willing to go to jail to deal with problems that were right around me that I, had become aware of, that racial discrimination was not just a problem in Mississippi. It was a problem in California. That we had racial discrimination in housing and employment. One of our targets at the time was a chain of grocery stores. And it was a radical idea to hire a Black clerk in a grocery store in a Black community. We had a campaign against the Bank of America. It was standard to have a bank in a Black community where they didn't hire Black people to be bank tellers. You know, you're shaking your hand. I mean, you know that that was true. And so we have these issues that are urgent, that, you know, that why are we having even a debate about whether college, you know, the University of California and junior colleges should be totally free. No one should ever take out a debt at the beginning of their lives that they are still paying off decades later to go and get an education. Here we're here in California, where under the California Constitution, the University of California is not supposed to charge tuition. It should be tuition free. Tell that to people who are paying, you know, they just don't call it tuition. They call it fees. And somehow that's supposed to explain it, you know, that, oh, well, we changed the name. It's no longer tuition. Now it's fees. And so we put up with that. And so I think that Martin Luther King, Clarence Jones, you know, he's about the age that Martin Luther King would be now. And so his legal advisor is well qualified to say, what would Martin Luther King say today?
I wanted to ask you this question. Thank you for those comments. You know, once upon a time, there seemed to be a growing consensus that the movement that Dr. King was leading was the right direction to go in. And we're in an age now of terrible fracturing and disagreement. It almost feels like irreconcilability. And one scholar calls this not consensus, but dissensus. And I'm wondering, does that change the way Dr. King and his followers should approach moving his vision forward today?
I don't know if change is the right word for it. I mean, what you describe is what King would call chaos. Chaos is when a lot of things are happening that, you know, that we feel we have no control over. And you know, we live in a nation, you know, you talk about the divisions now. This is a nation that fought a bloody civil war. One of the bloodiest wars in human history was fought right here, of Americans fighting against Americans. And we know that. It's you know, the divisions in the 1960s. I mean, you had a whole part of the nation where federal law was not being enforced. So 100 years after the Civil War, we were still divided as a nation. You know, Martin Luther King talked about that experience of his first trip to the North, and that sense of freedom when he was no longer in this segregation system of the South, but that he knew that he had to come back into that. And lots of Black Americans of my generation had to face that, of, you know, that, you know, I remember the shock of we were driving across the country to my grandfather's funeral, and we stopped someplace in Missouri, not really that far in the South. And, you know, at a gas station, and us kids wanted to use the bathroom. And they said, no, you have to go to, and it was basically an outhouse in the back. And my dad, you know, I still remember this. He was a veteran of World War II. He was a person who fought in the war. And he was also one of the best marksmen. He won awards for his ability to use weapons. And he was, he was still, he ended up as a lieutenant colonel in the Army Reserve. And imagine the humiliation. I've tried to put myself, like what would I do if I had my kids in the car and they wanted to go to the bathroom? And I said, no, if we try to fight this now, you might get hurt. And I know that that was his consideration, that yes, he could challenge it. Yes, he could, and in fact, he often carried a weapon. Yes, I could pull my weapon, but I might get myself and my family killed. So putting up with that humiliation. So the nation has always been divided. We had just recently a president who took pride in that, this was not a accidental part of his strategy. His strategy was them versus us. His strategy was not to unite the nation. His strategy was to mobilize that part of the nation that doesn't like the other part. And so it's, I've never accepted the argument, well, protests might be counterproductive. You might make people angry. If you occupy Washington, somebody might not get to work. And, I just laugh that off. I mean, it's just, you're denying a huge part of, just read the history books of this nation. If abolitionists back in the 19th century had said, oh, our anti-slavery activity might be disruptive. Yeah, it was disruptive. It caused riots in places. Yeah. It caused people to get killed. But they disrupted, and they eventually overcame slavery. So we have to really understand, people who were fighting for women's rights, they went to Washington. They disrupted, they got thrown in jail, and they were harshly treated while they were in jail. They were tortured, basically, and vilified. Now we kind of, oh, how wonderful the suffragettes were. That was not the attitude when they were around. Mm-hmm. So I think that we, maybe as a historian, I think like sometimes the greatest secrets are hidden in between the covers of books. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And say, look at the history.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. And I do want to talk about World House in the just a couple of minutes we have remaining. And I know it's a project connected to the Gandhi King Center. It's at Stanford and around the world. So please tell us about World House, how it relates to the King Institute and what its objectives are.
Well, there was a part of the King Research and Education Institute. I just recently retired as of December 31st from that. But I wanted to take the educational part. Now, we've always had, at least not always, but for most of this century, we've had something called the liberation curriculum. And we try to make educational materials available primarily to K through 12 teachers. We have an encyclopedia, we have lesson plans, we have documents that teachers can use. And so our goal was to make this available because we believe that education should be free, because we believe that education can liberate people. That's why we call it a liberation curriculum, that the purpose of education is to liberate people from the boundaries that limit their opportunities. By the way, I think that should always be the goal of education, sometimes it gets perverted into this notion it's to give grades and to which often are designed to limit the opportunity. I'm going to give you a bad grade, you're not going to get into college. And so it's a perversion of that notion that every student in the classroom deserves an education. And every student in that classroom, the D student, the A student, and all the way in between, deserves to have their opportunities expanded by the educational process. And if it doesn't do that, something is wrong with the process. Don't call it a school, call it a grading factory, but don't call it education, because that's something that every human being deserves. So taking that, and now we're over at the Freeman Spokely Institute for International Studies, and it kind of takes King's notion of the world house, which he outlined in his book, Where Do We Go From Here? He said, we've inherited this house. It's called the earth. We didn't buy it, we inherited it. And we have to live in it together. And I use that as a premise for saying, before you come into my house, I want to be sure that you're not going to create chaos there. There are certain house manners that you need to understand. There's people in the house from different backgrounds, and you need to learn how to live with people who might have different religions and different cultures and different experiences than you have. And so maybe the first thing you do when you come in the house is somebody sits you down and says, look, there's some house rules that you should kind of understand. You shouldn't do mean stuff. You shouldn't do destructive things. And the thing about those rules is that these are things that every human being knows at some level. It's more a matter of reminding them that every human being knows that I wouldn't have got here except for the kindness and generosity of a parent, one parent or two parents, or without other people, I would not have gotten to where I am right now. So they understand that. But sometimes, like parents often, when they tell their kids, I know you know this, but I am here to nudge you to remember what you already know. Mm-hmm. And I shouldn't, how many parents have said, I shouldn't even have to tell you this.
Yeah.
And as a parent, I can say, yeah, that's right. I shouldn't have to tell you this. You already know it. Mm-hmm. But I'm going to give you a strong reminder that there's a better side of you, and you know what that better side is, and that's what I want you to take into the world. And so I think that we sometimes make these messages too complicated, as if education is about intelligence and rote learning and all that. It's about making people better versions of themselves. And if you can't do that to the kid who's flunking out, you have to remember, that there were someone like a Fannie Lou Hamer who only had the barest education. And because somebody recognized that here's a potential leader. Mm-hmm. She might have only a third grade education, but a PhD mind. And that's something that I think teachers need to remember, because sometimes get into that rote thing of saying my job is just to decide who's the good student and who's the bad student.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think that's a strong, clear note to end on. And I see there are contacts for World House on the screen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're having our webinar as we speak. In fact, I will be going back to that, and people can through the end of today, I guess, watch all these films for free.
Right.
So I invite them to do that.
And their upcoming podcasts, I understand.
We do podcasts. We'll be starting to teach a course on Martin Luther King through Stanford Continuing Studies starting on Thursday.
Great.
We have a lot of programs. Come to our website.
Okay, this is beautiful. I think we're out of time, but thank you so much for speaking with us again. You and I do this once a year. It's really something I look forward to.
Good to talk to you.
Okay, good luck. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Carson and David. It was so interesting to hear about your connection, Dr. Carson, to so many different activist organizations, and particularly moving to hear about the story that you shared about your father, your experience traveling through Missouri. My name is Sheila Lunig, and I am the co-president of Piedmont Anti-Racism and Diversity Committee. Reflecting on what we've just experienced and on our theme today of changing souls, changing lives, and creating community, I'll close by sharing a quote from the dedicated activist and author Bell Hooks, who recently passed away in December. If we want a beloved community, we must stand for justice. A beloved community will be formed not by the eradication of difference, but by its affirmation, by each of us claiming the identities and cultural legacies that shape who we are and how we live in the world. This is the end of our program, and PADC would like to share a very special and heartfelt thanks to our founding MC Lois Corin and her daughter Camille for guiding us through this celebration together. Without Lois's leadership to create this event 25 years ago, we would not be here. We are so grateful for her steadfast commitment to racial equity in our community. We would also like to thank all of our speakers and performers, as well as the many PADC board members and volunteers who have worked to make this event happen, including Richard Turner, Jody Biskup, Ellen Lee, Suzanne Lane, Nathan Bald, Monica Garcia, Maria Gard, and Anna Weber Needle. Today's program was produced by our very own Veronica Anderson Thigpen, and we can't thank her enough for her commitment to building inclusive and equitable communities and her work and leadership in bringing this very special celebration to you. Thank you for joining us, and to learn more about future PADC events, visit our website at padc.info. We wish you all a peaceful day, and we're going to leave you with this beautiful rendition of Let There Be Peace by the Oakland Interfaith Youth Choir.